From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
President Trump could lower tariffs on Canada and Mexico as soon as tomorrow, according to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, after their implementation drove the S&P 500 to its lowest level since Election Day. We'll have more ahead with Jay Pelosky of TPW Advisory.
This as the president gets set to address a joint session of Congress just hours from now. We'll hear from two lawmakers who will be in the chamber for the speech, Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan of Virginia and Republican Congressman Darin LaHood of Illinois.
And our signature political panel is with us, too, on both the domestic and foreign policy issues expected to be featured tonight, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expresses regret over last week's Oval Office meeting, now says he wants to work with Trump towards peace. Thanks for joining us on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power, as we turn now to Capitol Hill, where it's going to be a long night. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall gets us started. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So when it comes to these tariffs that we're looking at, we have to remember that they're tied to some pretty tangible policy priorities for this White House when it comes to immigration as well as fentanyl. President Trump, for example, we know was tracking overdose deaths as a metric of progress leading up to today. And while Mexico and Canada surged their resources to the border, it wasn't enough at the end of the day to prevent these tariffs from going into effect. But as you previewed there, his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, within the last hour, previewed that there could be some relief starting as soon as tomorrow.
Now, both the Mexicans and the Canadians were on the phone with me all day today, trying to show that they'll do better. And the president's listening because, you know, he's very, very fair and very reasonable. So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff. But I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way. And we're going to probably be announcing that tomorrow.
It comes as the retaliation already started. Mexico said it was waiting until Sunday, but Canada hit back with tariffs on $107 billion worth of U.S. goods. Beijing imposed tariffs as high as 15%, mainly on U.S. agricultural goods. The White House has largely brushed off concerns about retaliation. Today, President Trump said it would just be factored into his reciprocal tariff calculations. That brings us to the next point, which is this is about to extend beyond President Trump's border policies. March 12th, for example, we're expecting steel and aluminum tariffs to go into effect. That could hit Canada and Mexico particularly hard. And then April 2nd is the date on the calendar when it comes to those reciprocal calculations going into effect, as well as a host of other tariffs when it comes to pharmaceuticals, autos, chips, and lumber, for example. Joe and Kaylee, no doubt this is going to be a big backdrop tonight when President Trump addresses a joint chamber of Congress today on Capitol Hill.
Yep, I would imagine he's got a thing or two he wants to say about all of this. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. And of course, make sure to tune in to Bloomberg Surveillance tomorrow morning when Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick will be joining live at 8 a.m. Wall Street time, as financial markets are whipsawed by news from him and from the president, with the S&P 500 today briefly turning positive before erasing its entire post-election gain by the close of trading. After hours, on the news from Secretary Lutnick, SPY, the ETF that tracks the index, is in positive territory, and Treasury yields also hit session highs, and the Canadian dollar and Mexican peso strengthened after his comments. For more now, we want to turn to Jay Pelosky, principal and founder of TPW Advisory. Welcome to Balance of Power. Jay, as we consider the market action we saw yesterday when President Trump made it clear he was going ahead with this today, the roller coaster action we saw today, now what has taken place after the comments from Secretary Lutnick, it begs the question, should anyone really be trying to trade on these trade policies, or are they just too unpredictable to actually lead it to having people move money around?
Yeah, Kaylee, it's great to be with you and Joe. And sure, it's been an environment where it's been mighty easy to lose money. So for us at TPW Advisory, you know, we're not traders. We're thematic long-term investors. So we have our positions and we're sticking to them. And we wrote a piece, I don't know, 3 weeks ago now called The Stoic Strategy, How to Invest in the Age of Trump. And we reached back to the Stoics and recognize that if one imagines everything's possible, then one fears nothing. And then we added three corollaries to that. One, pay no attention whatsoever to the president or to his advisors as far as what they say, because as we know, it can change at any moment. And this Howard Lutnick comment is, a perfect example of that. Second, pay attention not to what the president says, but what he does. And then third, pay attention not to the news, but to the market reaction to the news. And so in our view, all of this, tariffs, DOGE, NATO, Ukraine, is all in service of tax cuts. President Trump wants a big tax cut, and he needs to find ways to fund it because there's no fiscal room. And if the U.S. economy weakens, and as a result, rates go down, that's good. That reduces the deficit, gives more room for tax cuts. And if the dollar weakens, that's good too, because that's something that President would really like to see. So actually, in all of this, one can assume, or we believe, that President Trump actually has a plan. And he's kind of iterating towards that plan. And if the outcome of that plan is U.S. weakness, whether it's national security or economy, that's really not all that important.
Wow. All right. Well, Jay, fascinating. So your stoicism, then, I can only assume then is pointing to the second half of the year when some of this starts to pay off. Was that whole post-election rally then misguided?
Oh, no, Joe. I mean, the market is telling us very clearly what's going on. And so, again, we want to pay attention to the market, not to the news, not to the president, to the market. And it's abundantly clear. Year to date, S&P down, ACWI ex-US up 6%. That's 600 basis points of outperformance. Emerging markets up 3%, led by China up 15%, and Europe up 12%. So for all the talk about, Europe is a mess and China's uninvestable, those are the parts of the world that are leading, and the U.S. is lagging. And so we're of the view that we're at the very beginning of a secular change in global equity leadership away from the United States, which has been the dominant winner for the last 15 years since the bottom in 2009, to the rest of the world. And we believe that a major tailwind to this is going to be secular weakness in the U.S. dollar, driven by our main focus right now, which is capital repatriation. We think we're at the beginning of the world moving money out of the United States back to Europe, back to Asia, to fund defense spending, AI investment, infrastructure, climate, et cetera.
Wow.
It seems to me that that's exactly the opposite of what President Trump says he's trying to achieve with these policies. Jay, he wants more money coming in. He wants American manufacturing. That's why he keeps saying if you make it in the U.S., you won't face a tariff. Or you're telling us it's actually kind of going to work the opposite way.
Absolutely. And the market, not only am I telling you, Kayleigh, the market's telling us. Look, the market is smarter than me, you, all of us, and we have to listen to the market. And the market, again, it's abundantly clear. DeepSeek shot a hole in the heart of American exceptionalism, which is tech. And America has been priced for exceptionalism. It's by far the most expensive market in the world, by peak valuation for itself, peak valuation relative to the rest of the world. And clearly, the U.S. is not exceptional. U.S. growth is declining. Rest of the world growth is growing. U.S. stock market is going down. Rest of the world stock market going up. U.S. dollar going down. Euro going up. Yen going up. And we think this is going to continue. And so we're just at the very, very beginning of this. And look, part of it is that the U.S. is becoming less appealing, more chaotic, less certainty. And part of it is that the rest of the world is making big moves. Europe is going to spend gobs of money on defense. Thankfully, one of the things we've done well over the last couple of weeks is we added a position in our global macro model to European defense stocks. They are absolutely ripping and will continue to rip. China is focused on consumption. It knows it's very exposed with its exports to the United States, even though it's reduced them significantly as a percentage of overall exports. But nonetheless, China needs to focus on consumption because otherwise it faces deflation. Germany needs to stimulate because otherwise it faces stagnation. And so the main point, the big point, is that both Germany and China have fiscal space to expand. Debt to GDP are about 65% in both countries. The United States has shot that bullet already. That was the exceptionalism in our post-COVID growth expansion vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Debt to GDP in the United States is now 120%. That's why President Trump is trying to pull all these different levers to find the space to make his tax cuts.
Well, this has been sobering, Jay. The S&P 500 back below 5,800. How long do the losses last here in U.S. stock markets? Do we finish the year in the red?
Our view has been that the U.S. is set up for single-digit type returns, like no room for multiple expansion, right, as we just talked about. So it's all about earnings growth. Earnings growth is going to be single-digit. And that's why the market's worried here, because it's worried about growth. And the tell was a week or so ago when the 10-year rallied 11 basis points and stocks were down 1.7%. When bonds rally and stocks sell off, that's telling you they're worried about growth. And so because without growth, no earnings, no market expansion. And so our view is that single-digit type growth, as long as the economy does not go into recession, and we don't think it will. We think it can skirt recession. But the big story is the fact that the rest of the world offers opportunities, tremendous opportunities. And that's where we're focused. And so we're overweight non-U.S. equities, underweight U.S. equities, underweight government debt. They're bond bear markets, just as the global equity bull market is shifting from the U.S. to the rest of the world. The U.S. bond bear market is shifting to the rest of the world. Bonds selling off, JGBs selling off, China debt selling off. And so it all points in the same direction. So we expect non-U.S. equities to have double-digit returns and lead the way.
The view from Jay Pelosky. Thank you, Jay. He's founder, principal, TPW Advisory, with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, we'll have a look at how Democrats are planning to respond to President Trump's big speech tonight to a joint session of Congress with Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan of Virginia. She's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is not an adversarial thing. This is to continue good relationships and trade policy. So I think this initiative will achieve that desired result. You will get back to a point of equilibrium that does resemble free trade again. I think that's good for the American people and for our country. And as the president said, just have a little patience with this, let it play out, see how it develops. And I think at the end of the day, America is going to be better off.
House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today talking about President Trump's tariff policy with new levies implemented today against China, Canada, and Mexico. But just since then, we've understood from the Commerce Secretary that President Trump could talk about rescinding those tariffs as soon as tomorrow, at least when it comes to Canada and Mexico. Joining us with reaction to the tariffs and to look ahead to the big speech tonight, Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan of Virginia. She's with us here at the table, and it's great to have you back, Congresswoman. Thank you. Is this trade policy or gaslighting?
A little bit of both. I think, and the whiplash that the markets and our farmers and everyone from day one is astounding, and it makes it very hard for people to plan, and it makes everyone nervous on top of all of the chaos that we have seen since January 20th.
Well, the Democrats in the Virginia House delegation did write a letter to the new USTR about the impact on agriculture, specifically in Virginia. $429 million of farm exports, I believe, to Canada alone. But President Trump yesterday on True Social said for the great farmers, they're going to start making a lot more agricultural product inside the United States because on April 2nd, all the external agricultural product is going to be tariffed as well. Does that benefit farmers more than other tariffs hurt them? Is there a kind of net zero effect here?
Well, first of all, that's not how it works. You don't just start growing a crop overnight. And a lot of our farmers get inputs from other countries. Some of their farm equipment will be impacted by these tariffs and some of the machinery that they use. But more importantly, they're going to be retaliatory tariffs. The last time Trump put tariffs in place, there were retaliatory tariffs. And in Virginia alone, We had soybean farmers and tobacco farmers. Collectively, that was at least, I think, $61 million in losses. And so one of the first conversations I had was with a local elected leader in a rural area who is a Republican, who voted for Donald Trump, who is a farmer. And the first thing he said to me was, don't let him put the tariffs in place.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mentioned the Commerce Secretary earlier today. He referred to this as a drug war, not a trade war. He said the trade war will start on the 2nd of April when reciprocal tariffs are put into effect. And the administration seems to have been kind of delivering the message that some short-term economic pain is an acceptable cost to bring down opioid-related deaths in this country, that getting to the fentanyl scourge is the point of this. Is there some principle in that mission that you agree with?
We had the opportunity to pass a bipartisan, very strong border security bill that would have began working on addressing fentanyl coming into the United States last year. Last year. You know why we didn't do it? Because Donald Trump told House Republicans, don't pass that bill because I want something to run on and beat Joe Biden over the head with in the election. So there are ways that we can work with our partners in Canada and in Mexico to address the fentanyl traffic. There are ways that we can do that without harming the American people, without harming farmers. Look, with these tariffs, the cost of everything from groceries to gasoline, from toys to your tech gadgets, and everything else, the housing and health care, price is going to go up. And the American people, many of them, said they voted for Donald Trump because they wanted him to bring the cost down. Every action he has taken since day one is raising costs for the American people, and tariffs are part of that.
Well, and of course, tariffs are not where the action we've seen over the last 6 weeks ends. We have also seen on the part of the president and Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency a very rapid effort to shrink the size of the federal government. And I know a lot of your colleagues are bringing with them people who have been laid off from the federal government in different aspects. For the joint address tonight, you yourself are bringing a home care aide who is worried about potential Medicaid cuts. What message ultimately are you trying to send here? And do you think it's one that's going to be effective? Will it be heard by the other side of the aisle?
I hope so. What the message we are trying to send is every action that you are taking is hurting the American people. And we are bringing people, hardworking Americans, some who have dedicated their lives to this country and serving people, some who dedicate their lives to providing health care for their family or other people. Every single one of them that are coming tonight have been hurt by actions from the Trump administration or will be hurt if the budget plan goes forward to gut services, including stripping health care away from 80 million Americans to fund tax breaks for millionaires and large corporations.
What would you tell your colleagues who want to bring props and maybe make some disruptions tonight? Is that just part of these addresses now after what we saw Joe Biden go through last year?
I am focused on telling the story of the American people who will be harmed by this president's actions. And my focus is on sharing their stories and not props.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing some of your time with us this evening before you head back to the Capitol. Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan of Virginia here with us on Balance of Power. We appreciate it. And still ahead, Bloomberg Invests conversation with Ray McGuire, the president of Lazard, and Robert Rubin, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary. That's next, right here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Earlier today, Ray McGuire, the president of Lazard, and Robert Rubin, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary, joined Bloomberg Invest with our colleague Lisa Abramowitz to discuss tariffs and current government leadership. The conversation started on the impact of the Trump administration's policies.
The rule of law underlies our economy, and I think and that gives you certainty and predictability. And I think a lot of what is going on is adversely affecting confidence. It is now, and I think will more so in the future, confidence in the rule of law. This whole discussion about retribution and the use of the law enforcement agencies of the United States to attack our components, or opponents rather, the administration, is a good example. I think this, as I said a moment ago, I think the violation of our treaty obligations to Mexico and to Canada. So yeah, I think that I think predictability and confidence are essential and underlie rather our economy. And I think another good example, if I may, of something I think is doing tremendous damage, which is DOGE. I have spent my entire career focused on fiscal discipline. We balanced the budget in 1998, first time in 30 years. I think we knew what the heck we were doing. I don't think these people have the foggiest notion what they're doing. And I think DOGE is doing tremendous damage to government and to the recipients of government services and government activities. Now, are there excess expenditure? Are there inefficiencies and is there excess regulation? Yes. But you approach it with a rational cost-benefit analysis, not a burn and the burning down of what exists, and then the thought that you rebuild it. And I think we really are doing tremendous damage to government and to our economy.
Ray, you're nodding. Do you want to add in? Or you're like, no?
The answer is, the response is, as you think about the world, geoeconomically and geopolitically, the anchor, the sacrosanct anchor that the U.S. has is rule of law. It has never been a factor in any conversations that we've had up to this point.
Is it a factor now?
It is moving into the conversation in ways that we haven't visited historically. So we need to be very mindful of conversations that today, it is not central to the conversations, but it has now become part of the conversation where historically it hasn't been.
You can find the full conversation with Ray McGuire, President Lazard, Robert Rubio, of course, former Treasury Secretary, online or on the terminal. Kayleigh, interesting. I don't know what they would have thought if they'd heard from Howard Lutnick at that point. Following that conversation, we heard from the Commerce Secretary on another network that they may well cut a deal and rescind the tariffs against Canada and Mexico tomorrow. So maybe he'll announce that in the speech tonight.
Well, he could, or at the very least say he's going to meet them in the middle, to use the words of the Commerce Secretary, which begs the question of whether they needed to ultimately be implemented in the first place. Yeah. Or if this is the way in which we're seeing the negotiation play out on the part of the president. This would go down as the shortest trade war since Colombia. And we've, over the past couple of weeks, had a few turns at this. Our special coverage, we should note, by the way, begins 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Kayleigh and I will be here, along with our signature panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, and Anne-Marie Hord-Duran with us live in the Capitol for a very important night here in Washington, D.C. And coming up, we'll take a look at how Congress is reacting to this tariff news. Republican Congressman Darin LaHood of Illinois. They'll be with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
President Trump makes his triumphant return, of course. Tonight, as was mentioned, it's 5 years after his last State of the Union address. This is a joint address to Congress, not a State of the Union, because the State of the Union is typically delivered on or around the sort of the one-year anniversary, first year in office. But this president is working so quickly, I invited him to come early in the process to give this joint address because there's so much to report to the people, and we're delighted he's going to be there.
House Speaker Mike Johnson today setting the scene on what to expect from the big speech tonight, addressing a joint session of Congress. Donald Trump, as he said, making his triumphant return here with a razor-thin majority in the House and a relatively small one in the Senate. A lot of work to get done and 10 days away from a possible government shutdown. We spent some time with Bloomberg's Washington Bureau Chief Peggy Collins on the big night. Peggy, I know your team is ready, and this is going to be a speech that makes a lot of news. Donald Trump tends to move the markets lately when he speaks. How delicate will this issue of tariffs need to be after the action we've seen on Wall Street the last couple of days?
Well, as you said, Joe, Donald Trump has moved the markets, and he's moved the markets this week to the downside in terms of how markets are reacting to the tariffs. But already, just in the last hour or so, we saw Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick come out and say there may be a pathway towards a deal on some of these tariffs with Canada and Mexico, for example, that they've been on the phone with representatives from the countries all day today, and that there may be a way to head back to the negotiating table. President Trump has said in the past that he wants to renegotiate USMCA. That may be where we see some of the compromise start to mold. He's been talking a lot about fentanyl, about the border, but now we may see USMCA come into focus here as to how they get these tariffs down.
the USMCA, of course, which was signed during his first administration. But I guess all these years later, he's no longer satisfied with that, Peggy. So when we consider that tariffs will no doubtedly be an element of the speech tonight, to what extent do we expect this is going to be focused on domestic policy, given the audience that is likely tuning in, versus foreign policy? Is there still live conversations on negotiations, not just with these trading partners, but Russia and Ukraine, for example?
Well, I think given how much the president and his administration have done in the first few weeks alone, we're going to see both come to the forefront tonight, foreign policy and domestic policy. The president has said before that he believes the border, as much as the economy, helped gain him his victory in 2024. So I think we'll see a lot on immigration. I think we will see him address inflation and how he's going to bring prices down, even though we haven't seen much of that yet in terms of egg or grocery prices alone. And then I think we're going to see a lot on foreign policy because the administration has done a lot in the Middle East. And then, of course, in just the past week, we've had Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. at the forefront. So we're watching out for some possible news. We have a story out already that there's some optimism in Washington that there may be some progress being made back to the table with Ukraine as well.
Can this president, when he looks across the room tonight, the rows of lawmakers, trust them to avoid a government shutdown in less than 2 weeks?
I think, so far we have seen Congress really fall in line with the president and what he wants to do. Yeah. But we have also seen a lot of constituencies and people around the country start to raise questions about the speed and the tactics of shrinking the government, the efficiency, the job cuts. So I think that is something that we will start to see really come to head in the next couple of weeks, because we're heading towards a potential government shutdown as soon as the middle of this month.
Yep. The clock is ticking.
10 days.
Bloomberg's Washington Bureau Chief Peggy Collins, thank you so much. And we want to go now live to Capitol Hill, where we're being joined by Republican Congressman Darin LaHood of Illinois. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio, Congressman. To get to something Peggy just told us, this idea that President Trump, and he has said this himself, was largely elected on the basis of voters wanting something different with the U.S. economy. And considering where the focus has been in the first 6 weeks of his administration, acting to shrink the government, putting tariffs on our trading partners, has he done enough in that regard yet on actually getting prices down? How does he need to message that to the American people tonight?
Well, Kayleigh, I think tonight is an opportunity for the president to lay out his vision for what he wants, his narrative on how we do exactly what you said, fix the economy. Part of that, it falls on us. We're working on tax reform right now to help bring relief to working families, similar to what we did in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that created the best economy in my lifetime. That's part of it. Increasing energy production, energy independence, that's going to help bring down prices. Deregulation is going to do that. What DOGE is doing is going to do that. So a lot of that falls on us as members of Congress to do that. We started that process last week with the budget reconciliation vote that we passed in the House. Now the hard work begins to bring some of those results moving forward. But I would also just mention the president announced yesterday $100 billion investment by the Taiwanese semiconductor, $500 billion from Apple a couple weeks ago that'll create 20,000 new jobs. I mean, those are positive things, but we have a lot more to do, and I think we'll see that laid out tonight with his vision.
Congressman, it's great to have you with us here on what I know is an important and busy night here. What does the president need to say about tariffs? You probably heard the headline a short time ago. Howard Lutnick says the Canada-Mexico tariffs could come down as soon as tomorrow. And I wonder your thoughts on the impact that these tariffs could have on your district, but also on the markets. We've seen massive volatility and, frankly, big losses, reversing gains since the election over the past couple of days, certainly since the inauguration. Are you comfortable with trade policy being an answer for what the administration is framing as a drug war?
Well, I will tell you this, Joe. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. I serve on the Trade Subcommittee that has jurisdiction over tariffs. I don't think we should be predicating our economic policy on tariffs. To me, tariffs are taxes. They're taxes on my farmers, my manufacturers, my constituents, my consumers. But should we be able to use tariffs in a tactical, strategic way to go after bad actors in countries that don't abide by the same rules and standards that every other industrialized country in the world does? Of course. And I would put China first and foremost on that list. I do have concerns about Mexico and Canada, two of our biggest trading partners. We signed, as you referenced, USMCA, a trade agreement that was the president's initiative and got it done. So I think we got to be careful about collateral damage that can be done to the economy. We saw it in the markets. So my hope is that we can have a resolution to this sooner rather than later.
Well, what the administration argues, Congressman, is that, yes, it may have an impact on costs, but this is going to be a one-time price adjustment. You don't expect that's the way your constituents will experience it?
Well, if you look at how intertwined the supply chains are for lots of different industries with Canada and Mexico, I have concerns about that. I think it could have a detrimental effect on jobs and opportunities and slow down the economy, and we can't afford to have that happen now. Listen, from a national security standpoint, stopping fentanyl from coming across our southern border, killing Americans, stopping illegal immigration. But on illegal immigration, getting rid of the Remain in Mexico policy and catch and release and putting in place strong enforcement mechanisms has worked already. Think about this. We went from 190,000 people a year ago crossing our border to 8,000. It's gone to a trickle. So some of that is working already. I'm not sure the tariffs will help to make that any better.
You referenced at the start of our conversation, Congressman, some of the work that you have to do. It begins with funding the government after the deadline passes 10 days from now. There are a lot of questions about whether a CR through the end of the year is in fact going to work and get the support of some Democrats who apparently will be needed to pass it. Assuming that happens, let's say we avoid the shutdown, does that give you the space on the Ways and Means Committee to craft the legislation that you need to extend or make permanent the Trump tax cuts?
100%. If we do nothing this year, Joe, we're going to have $4.5 trillion of tax increases because of the expiration of the tax cuts we put in place. So, yes, that is foundational to what we need to do. You know, everything from, $199 to 100% bonus depreciation to R&D tax credit, guilty and beat. I mean, these are core provisions and foundational to making sure we keep the economy going at a high level and getting back to what we had under TCJA in 2017.
So how ultimately, as Joe suggests, the Senate, your counterparts in the other chamber, would like to see the tax cuts made permanent, not just extended. And there is a big question as to how you make the math around that work. Are there adequate spending cuts to be found to achieve permanency with the way this is structured in the House?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to have everything offset by spending cuts. I don't know that that's possible, but I do think that we're going to do everything we can on the Ways and Means Committee. We have a $4.5 trillion operating budget to look at on how we do that. I mean, we're going to have some really, really monumental spending cuts that will help on that. But it's not going to be perfect by some people's expectations. But I think we have a good working relationship with the Senate right now. And we got to be focused on the goal, and that's to get fundamental tax reform and get the economy back on track.
Congressman, I know you're bringing a retired FBI agent as your guest to the address tonight, and our audience should know that you serve on the Intelligence Committee. There were reports over the weekend that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered cyber ops against Russia to cease. Can you confirm that that is in fact true, and is that the direction we should take?
Well, I'm not going to get into things that I learn or review on the Intelligence Committee, but I'm satisfied that we continue to have a good tactical and strategic working relationship with the Ukrainians and our allies through the Five Eyes. That remains intact and will continue to remain intact. And we got to do everything we can to continue to support the Ukrainians. But obviously, with President Trump wanting a peaceful resolution, that's going to be part of the calculation. And hopefully, as we saw today, Zelensky wants to come back, get the critical mineral deal done. And we ought to be focused on how we can have a peaceful resolution that allows Ukraine to keep some of its territory and be in the best position possible to ward off anything from Russia in the future.
Well, we appreciate your answers this evening, Congressman. It sounds like you're somewhat against the grain on some of these issues, and we'd like to stay in touch with you. Republican Congressman Darin LaHood of Illinois. Enjoy the speech. Coming up, our signature panel is with us. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano weigh in on the global tariff reaction. What to watch in the president's address later. We'll have full coverage right here through the evening on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
think you're going to see great, strong leadership tonight in the President's State of the Union. We will be there. Looking forward to it. The man sitting right behind the President. We know tonight the President's speech will not get ripped up by a Speaker of the House because our Speaker of the House has been leading the cause to usher in this agenda.
No, we will not be ripping up the speech tonight. I would like to frame it in gilded gold, but I'm not sure how to do that from the podium.
Not sure that'll happen. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise and the Speaker, of course, Mike Johnson, setting the stage for President Trump's address to Congress tonight. The pair referring, of course, to when then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ripped up her copy of President Trump's speech following the 2020 State of the Union address. Unclear exactly what Democrats will do to register their opposition to some of Donald Trump's policies later, but the president this time will have a Republican speaker and his vice president sitting behind him. And joining us now to assess what many call the Super Bowl of politics ahead tonight, our signature panel. They'll be with us for the duration. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. All right, so here we go. We've been talking about it, warming up to this for days now, Jeannie. We actually had a Democrat at the table here this evening. Congresswoman McClellan was not in favor of Democrats bringing props or making noise. How does the party answer what they hear tonight?
I couldn't agree with a Congresswoman more. I think that has been, for the right reason, the advice of the leadership. Whether Democrats follow it or not is a totally another question. Yeah. But it is not a good way to go, because they should let Donald Trump speak and try to explain the chaos of the first 43 days of his administration. Let the American public hear from them. Don't make yourself the story. I mean, you were just playing Nancy Pelosi. She learned that that is not the right thing to do, and she's advising against it. But again, there's a lot of Democrats in there, and there's a lot of angry Democrats in the base that are pushing them to speak out.
Well, I would also imagine the responses are going to be dictated by what exactly they're hearing, Rick. It becomes a question of tone from the president and what he plans to talk about tonight. Is this going to be about what he has done over the last 6 weeks or everything he still wants to do yet?
Well, I have no doubt Donald Trump will have his dog whistle in his mouth. So if there are dogs in the audience, you're going to hear screaming. Look, I mean, you know, we haven't actually heard much from the AOC and the squad or, you know, the progressive left. That's my point. I mean, like, they've almost not been in the news for the last 3 months. And kind of refreshing to an old Republican like me to not have that debate going on in the sidelines. But who knows what's going to happen tonight? You know, we've been talking about the fact that it's become pretty common, sadly, for there to be some kind of disruption, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. Yeah. And so we can hope that Ginny's right and everybody lets decorum reign supreme. It obviously is something we need in Washington badly right now. Whether you like it or not, he's president of the United States, and Donald Trump's going to present his plan, and that's the idea tonight, right? So if you're going to go, expect to hear things you don't like if you're Democrat, expect to hear things you like as Republicans, and vice versa.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he'll sprinkle some stuff out there for the Democrats that, like, if they don't applaud, they'll look odd.
Well, that's why, and he can call them out. I wonder if he wants a little bit of that back and forth, you know, the volatility that he can trade on that Joe Biden kind of enjoyed when he was in the rostrum.
Yeah, I mean, we were all here last year, and Joe Biden, they were going back and forth. And so it seems to be that's sort of how these things have evolved. You know, it's not the way that I traditionally remember them or appreciate them, but that's where we are. But I do think the president's task tonight, if I was to advise him, would be to explain to those moderates in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in those swing states that he keeps talking about how he won, why all the chaos of the first 43 days and what is the upside for them, particularly as it pertains to costs and the cost of living, because that is how he won. And a lot of people are telling pollsters at this point that it doesn't seem like he's focused on that now. If he is, he's got to explain what he's been doing for these last 43 months and why all the DOGE cuts and all of that stuff is going to get him where he said he was going to go.
Well, and I would imagine tariffs factor into that conversation as well, Rick. Implement them today. The Commerce Secretary says they may be rolled back by tomorrow. Can we take anything he says tonight on that subject as fact, credibly, when it's changing so quickly.
Yeah, thank God for Howard Lutnick, right? I mean, like, as if we didn't have enough news today about the tariffs that just went into effect today. He comes out and says, well, but they may not be in effect tomorrow. I mean, it's really stunning. Market goes down, Dow 670 points, and it's like, we're just kidding? I mean, maybe he should have saved them till April 1st and just said,
Do you think they're
April
just kidding,
Fools!
though, because they saw what happened to the market?
Look, if they are, then that's not a good look, right? If you're going to react to the markets that way with global trade sanctions to the degree that he has done them, the largest in recent history, you shouldn't be swayed by the downturn because it was predictable, right? Everybody was talking about it. Just he needs to start watching Bloomberg so that he understands the impact of his own policies on the economy.
They've got it on in the White House right now. He did post a screen grab from a terminal today on Truth Social. I don't know if anyone saw that. But look, we don't call it a State of the Union until he's been in for a year, but he's still going to say the state of our union is the famous line. How does he complete it?
Oh, I think he's going to think things are great, right?
Great,
it's his
all
presidency.
I thought it was still Joe Biden's
From
economy.
this point on, all the good stuff is his, and all the bad stuff is what he was left with Biden.
The state of our union is what, Jeannie?
I think it's going to be just what Rick said.
Yeah.
What I've done is absolutely superb. What Joe Biden left me is horrific, and I'm going to fix it. I mean, that is typical Donald Trump. But again, he has an opportunity tonight to speak to the biggest audience he will get for the next year. And this is why it is so important that he come in and speak to those moderate swing voters who got him over the hump. I mean, he didn't win this huge mandate that he talks about. He did win narrowly, and he's got to retain those voters, and polls show they're starting to slip away very early.
Well, and isn't it that exact same group of voters that the Democratic response giver, Senator Alyssa Slotkin, is intended to speak to, given she won Michigan, as did Trump in November?
Exactly, and that's who she needs to talk to, Kayleigh, if she ever gets on TV, because we understand Trump may go long. She may be pushed to midnight, but that's exactly who she's got to talk to. And she is a brilliant person to do the very, very difficult task of responding to the president. She's got to talk about kitchen table issues, not in a kitchen, as I told you earlier today.
Yeah, we saw that already. I don't know what you expect from the official response here, what kind of a show we're going to get there, Rick, but it's from Michigan and not a mistake that she's going to be speaking presumably about tariffs, right?
Yeah, I would think that she's going to talk about the pernicious effect of tariffs on things like jobs and manufacturing in her home state specifically, but writ large in the country. And she'll have some wind at her back. I mean, today has been a bad day for tariffs in the sense of the overall impact on the economy. And, you know, when you watch the dialogue that's happening, most of it is very cautionary, like, hey, this could really backfire on the administration.
Yeah.
I hear very few people talking about why tariffs are good for the economy, and even Republicans are out saying, we're fighting fentanyl. We're not looking at the economy. We're fighting fentanyl. And that is a loser argument. If anyone thinks they're going to get reelected in a year and a half from now with the fentanyl argument on tariffs, they're crazy.
Well, and Jeannie, you were just mentioning this notion of when Alyssa Slotkin's even going to get on the air. We were just showing a chart on Bloomberg TV and for our audience on YouTube as well of how long these things typically go, usually in the ballpark of 80 minutes. But this is President Donald Trump we're speaking about. Jeannie, if you had to over-under this thing going past 11 o'clock,
Office pool, here we go.
I'm thinking, let me say 94 minutes.
Okay, Rick.
That's where I am.
Well, I was under during the inaugural speech and lost, so I'm going all the way, 2 hours.
Full two.
Full two.
Wow.
Well,
okay.
and Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano will be with us for all of it, as long as it lasts, to help with our analysis after and our special coverage of this address to a joint session of Congress. It starts 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.